Hello, guys.
Hi. Hi,
Hello.
Bob. How's it going?
At no expense spared, this is the Bob and Ramon show outside broadcast unit. We've literally, behind the cameras here, we've got dozens of oppos, servants, lackeys, butlers. We've got catering, catering truck,
Off camera.
lighting. It's unbelievable expense. Or, more likely, we've got an iPad, an iPhone, and we're using Ramon's excellent Samsung.
No. Huawei.
Huawei.
Yes.
You can't use those anymore for British security, you know that.
Well, I mean, seeing as British intelligence,
I'm not in British intelligence. I'm British, but I've got no intelligence.
Right.
Having covered that, anyway, so this is the setup for today. No guitars, motorbikes in the background, so different kind of sound mixing problems for which a prior apology. But we're in a very special place. We're in a bit of a shrine.
We certainly are. Bob. We're actually at Decca Studios, which we've actually featured on the channel before, but we thought we'd come back and give it its just desserts and really just go through a bit of the history of the place and just take it right back to the beginning of when it first started, which was actually Bob in 1980. Sorry, 18. Sorry, no.
61.
No, we're going to take it back further. We're going to go to 1888.
1888?
Yeah, this was originally, what this place here behind us, was originally the West Hampstead Town Hall. Okay, so we were at the Town Hall, and it was hired out for private functions, and it was actually called the Moonlight Club, which is the Town Hall, and there was a big sort of hall in here with a stage.
Was this called the Moonlight Club?
Yes.
No,
it wasn't.
No, the Moonlight Club. Moonlight Club wasn't until the 80s or 90s.
You know what? Let me have a look here in my notes.
Right, I think, because I'm old enough to remember, not the 1880s, but the 1970s.
Oh, right, yeah, you're right. You are right, but.
And the bit we haven't talked about yet became the Moonlight Club.
Became the Moonlight Club. You know what? Should we start this again?
No, we're having such fun.
So this was hired out for private functions, and it had a really big hall, which later became Studio One. Okay, and that was it was a big stage, and it was used in the 1920s for private hire, maybe weddings, private functions, and that was way back in the 1920s. Decca Records was formed in 1929, and it was really it started off by it was actually bought. Or rather, this place was bought by a guy called Sir Edward Lewis. Okay,
probably Edward Lewis back in those days before he got a Sir on.
Yes, he was originally a stockbroker.
I wonder how much he had to give to a political party to get that Sir back in those days.
Well,
now with inflation, it's probably 500,000 quid for a peerage. Oops, but back in the day, maybe it was about 30 bob and change between the wars.
Yeah, it could be.
Could it be cheap?
So originally this place, in the whole recording industry, the vinyl recording industry, this guy, Edward Lewis, he actually had a company called Crystallate Vinyl. Now, I don't know if he actually bought it. I think he bought the company.
Uh-huh.
But Crystallate Vinyl actually made records, and they were kind of like an early record company. You had EMI and you had Crystallate.
78s in shellac of the time.
Absolutely. So we're going to fast forward to 1948, and then it became a fully fledged studio.
And then I looked outside.
And just behind Bob here is a blue plaque, and it's
we'll put a close up in right now.
And this is actually in sort of memory of Lonnie Donegan's. He kind of came here. There's with a great British artist called Chris Barber. It was Chris Barber and Hugh Mendel was the producer on this session, and it was in 1954, and they released an album. They recorded a whole album called New Orleans Joys album. Okay, but on that album there was one particular track.
They basically ran out of material before they finished cutting an album, so they went to the pub, had a drink, came back, did a couple of jazz jams, and they were still wanting a bit. So Hugh Mendel asked them if you got anything else, and Lonnie Donegan, who was just pioneering skiffle at the time, actually literally lobbed out Rock Island Line, and that's where it was recorded and came from. And it then became a success a few years, I think probably 57, a few years later.
Actually, so just to mention, Chris Barber played double bass, and I don't think
trumpet player, wasn't he?
Yeah, he wasn't known as a double bass player, and I think Lonnie Donegan said, "Can you play double bass?" And Chris Barber said, "Yeah, I can." Great musician. And anyway, so they released the album, New Orleans Joys album, in 1954. But then they re-released the single Rock Island Line in November 1955.
Okay.
You know,
just after I was born.
Yes. So that's when it really became. That's when the whole skiffle
About
thing.
a couple of months before they put the last stones in at Stonehenge.
Well, apparently I'm older than you, according to some of our fans.
According to, well, no, you got your hat on tonight, so nobody's.
Don't look underneath it. So anyway, so Jimmy Page, yeah, he's a young lad trying to learn guitar. Sorry, red London bus going past him. He's trying to learn guitar. What does he learn? What does he listen to? He listens to skiffle.
Well, so did the Beatles.
Yeah.
Well, the Quarrymen.
The Quarrymen was a skiffle band. Yeah. So this is a really important.
It was a huge craze in the late 50s, and the great thing about skiffle was really cheap because you needed a guitar, you hit something, you had a bass that was probably a packing case with a broomstick and a bit of string.
Like a tea chest.
A tea chest, that's
tea
it.
Chest, yeah.
Dum, 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 kind of just not really in tune even.
And these tea chests would have come from, the Far East, wouldn't they? So these tea chests would have come with tea from.
They would have come with tea from the Far East. Or they would have been, packing cases in the old days before cardboard, before Amazon.
Yes, but it would have been that thin. I can remember.
You can really tell we're doing an outside broadcast because we've got complete control. We've sealed off the whole area. The whole area is completely sealed off, obviously, so there's no traffic. You can't hear any traffic. If you're hearing any traffic, it's an illusion, or we've added the sound effect later for credibility.
Bob's got friends in high places. So
that goes enough bloody motorbike. Carry on, Sergeant.
So okay, so these are the steps that we're actually sitting on. This is the interesting thing. So the steps that we're actually sitting on. This is the really interesting thing. Is 4 guys from Liverpool. In 1962, 1st of January.
1st of January.
After Christmas, after New Year's Eve.
Lousy weather, the coldest winter in record.
Yeah. And 4 Liverpudlians.
That's it.
Would have walked up these very steps. These very, very steps. And
to audition.
Yeah, and they would have been.
They had a hangover because they'd been out the previous night.
Yeah.
And they arrived late, and it wasn't, by all accounts, it was a pretty friction-full session.
Yeah. And of course we're talking about the Beatles here, and Brian Epstein, their manager, was really angry because he'd set up this session, and Dick Rowe was actually the A&R guy here at Decca at that time, and I think Mike Smith was also part of the the management here, and for the artist management, whatever. And basically the story was that Brian Epstein was really, really not happy with the Beatles because they're 4 lads, and I think it'd taken them like 18 hours to drive down.
They had a horrid journey because of snow and rain and shit.
They're 4 lads in a car because Brian Epstein got the train down. Whereas, and then I think he probably
got the Pullman, in which case he would have been smoking a fine cheroot, and he probably would have been eating a little beef and red wine in the dining car.
Absolutely. Just like you.
Sure. If only. A life I used to live.
Yes. So I digress. Brian Epstein, he's arrived here. He's waiting for them, and they finally arrive, and they actually do a pretty good job. Actually, Brian Epstein is actually really happy with their performance. It's quite a nice performance that they do. But like I said, Mike Smith actually declined them. He heard them, and he just said, "No, guitars are on the way out."
Guitars are on the way out. As dear reader, you will have understood, they have continued to be on the way out ever since, and they continue to be on the way out even today.
Yeah.
Yeah, with prices rising through the roof, sales of guitars and amplifiers at record levels, but even them, they're still in decline. Okay.
So anyway, what a mistake. That was probably, so Decca were kind of labelled the guys that made the biggest mistake in rock history, in the music industry.
Yep.
And, it's like it was a tragic mistake of Greek proportions.
Well, what's so interesting also, there's a little, because I spent most of my life, in work in offices and in management. And there's a really interesting management lesson here, which is who's the guy? This guy Dick Rowe, right, was the guy who got it in the neck for the guy who turned down the Beatles on the basis of the session in the building behind us. Yeah. And yet, a little bit of historical delving shows that it's actually this Mike Smith who declined them and not Dick Rowe. So Dick Rowe, as it often in management, carried the can for a dodgy decision through history,
but
unjustly.
As we're going to find out, he made some great decisions like the Moody Blues.
Yeah.
I think he maybe David Bowie. He was here, wasn't he? I mean, David Bowie cut his first records here.
David Bowie's kind of troubled, difficult, can't get a grip on a market years. He was with Decca. That's absolutely right. It wasn't until he got to RCA that he started releasing the stuff that was obviously historic, and the rest is.
And coming back to
history.
the Beatles, Bob, the one good thing about Decca was Brian Epstein had recorded the Beatles here, so then Brian Epstein actually had some tapes that he could then go out to other record labels and use and show, look, this is what we recorded at Decca. So in a way, it wasn't a completely wasted.
But even then, by all accounts, it was slow going until they got to Parlophone, and then Parlophone, which were a bit of an afterthought label within the EMI group at the time. So remember all the big groups, EMI and Decca those days. I mean, the big money was in jazz and classical. It was sober music, this youngster stuff, rock and roll, guitar-y stuff. It's, flash in the pan. Anyway, but Parlophone took an interest, and the rest is history, because Beatles signed up with Parlophone, released those albums, and became arguably the greatest pop band that the world's ever seen.
So then the A&R people, Dick Rowe, whatever, then he goes to the Crawdaddy Club in 1963, and who does he spot there, Bob?
He spots Michael Jagger, Esquire, and his bunch of well-known...
Or shall we say Brian Jones, because he was a leader.
Brian Jones was a leader, but all those chaps, all those young men who were playing in, Surrey at the time, but obviously had grown up, in the Badlands of Memphis and places like that.
Yeah.
Oh no, the Badlands of Surrey, and basically those guys who were instrumental, along with a few others, all of whom I worship, in basically taking the blues out of America, repackaging it, and sending the blues back. I mean, the story of the blues, with its kink over to England, is a wonderful and unexpected story.
Yeah, and also, just an interesting point is that Andrew Oldham, who was their manager,
Lou Oldham,
he didn't actually like Decca. He didn't like the engineers. He didn't like the studio sound. He didn't like the equipment, the desk. So he wanted to have more control and actually produce them, because obviously, I think if you produce them, then you get what's called points on the track.
Yeah.
You can make more money.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of a way he became more involved in
the studio behind us, Decca, was notoriously conservative. The producers and the engineers actually wore the brown coats like Ronnie Barker wore in Open All Hours, like shopkeeper
classic
coats.
British sitcom.
They actually wore effectively kind of like electrical engineers clothing, and they saw themselves as electrical and electronics engineers.
They all had these like sort of overalls and aprons.
And
whatever,
you needed a degree in audio to work here and stuff like that. It was a very, very serious business.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of the guys, Bob, I think they actually invented. If somebody wanted something like just down the road here in Abbey Road, if somebody wanted a piece of kit, they'd make it. They'd have a workshop at the back, and they'd actually make the equipment to use.
So listen, are we going to talk about not only these steps in this building, but this immediate vicinity?
We can talk about anything you like, Bob. Anything, as long as it's not innuendos, because we're not allowed.
We're done with innuendos. There will be no further mentions of the size of hands, feet, and other appendages in this video.
Exactly.
Are we clear? Are we clear on that?
We are very clear. Yes.
Clear on that.
Apologies.
Okay. Well, anyway, in this street, which is Broadhurst Gardens, London Northwest 6, adjacent, just on the corner to my left, your right, is a pub. The pub is called the Railway Arms, or the Railway Tavern. It's been there forever. It's been there since the late 19th century. And it's, a classic big corner pub. Big, tall, big windows, upstairs function room, and so on. And it's also got a back room, which is on the side, which is just again along from me. And that room was most important because that room was this club that opened in 1961 called Klooks Kleek.
That's right.
Named after a jazz musician.
Or a jazz album. I think it was a jazz album. Or maybe it's a musician. I think it was some. It was. It was a Kenny Clark.
Kenny Clark.
How come I've got all this information?
You've got all this information.
So
Kenny Clark.
it started as a jazz club from 1961 until 1970, and Dick Jordan and Jeff Williams were the two guys that started it.
And it was an amateur endeavour. They both had day jobs. I think one of them worked in advertising, and the other one worked in photography or something like, or design, something like that. So they're in the creative industries in back in the day, when it was a tiny village.
I think they were doing TV adverts, weren't they, or something like that?
I think something to do with
in cinema. They were
cinema adverts.
Cinema
that's right. In those days, the cinema companies all used to make up these ads for their clients. So they'd go to the local curry house and say, advertise in the local flea pit. Advertise your curry house. And so you used to get these incredibly cheap and nasty and rather funny ads saying, the curry place just 50 yards around the corner. And they were quite good value, actually. It's part of the whole cinema-going experience. Before you got to the posh ads, you had all the local ads, and they used to stitch all them together. And anyway, these two guys were basically, as an amateur endeavour, they ran this jazz club of an evening above this pub. And it was a 7-day-a-week affair, and it morphed as musical taste did across the decade, from jazz through into what we call kind of pop and
then
beat,
rock,
and then rock. And the people that played here, and we'll go through a bit of a list, unbelievable.
So just to point out, the Klooks Kleek album was by Kenny Clark, released in 1956, if anyone's interested. But let's talk about some of the performers. And this is something I didn't know, I was shocked, but Stevie Wonder performed there in 1966. Okay, 10 years after, in 1968.
I would so love to have seen 10 years after playing. They played here quite a lot, quite regularly. And I would so love to have seen that band. I mean, I love the first 3 albums before they became famous, and did the Woodstock thing. And they're a pretty derivative British blues band. I don't think they set the world alight like the Blues Breakers, but I thought they were a fantastic band. I thought Alvin Lee was a wonderful guitar player, and I thought the rest of the band were really tight and solid underneath it. I'd love to have seen them in a room this size.
A band that I would have loved to have seen is the Graham Bond organisation.
He played here a lot.
Yeah, with obviously Ginger Baker on drums and Jack Bruce on bass.
Dick Hexel-Smith on sax.
Yeah.
Shame was he had a terrible heroin problem, ended up killing himself.
Yeah, I think it was the 6:30 from Paddington. Seriously, yeah.
He threw himself underneath it, did he?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think I think it was in. I'll tell you where it was. It was Wimbledon or somewhere like that. Maybe Wimbledon or Clapham. It was Clapham Junction or Wimbledon, somewhere around there.
Very sad. But again, that was probably the first supergroup, Graham Bond band, because you had all these amazing musicians coming out of it. The formation of Cream.
Of course, and other bands of note that played there were Led Zeppelin, Elton John.
Imagine seeing Led Zeppelin in that room up there.
Deep Purple, Fleetwood Mac, Cream, and then it changed. It changed to the Moonlight Club in 1977 until 1993.
That coincided, of course, 1976, as you will well know, was the summer of hate in London, and that's when the punk thing exploded. Mm-hmm. So when the Moonlight came along, it was all about punk, post-punk, new wave, and of course two-tone. So the high energy kind of
the Specials played
the ska,
in '79,
the ska thing. So all that stuff used, and I used to come here back in those days. Fantastic venue. Yeah.
Adam and the Ants, and also U2 did their first ever English.
I missed that. Imagine that.
First ever English gig at Klooks Kleek. So that was a really interesting thing. So I mean, also this coming back to the studio, Bing Crosby recorded here with the orchestra.
Smooth old crooner.
We're going to talk about Lulu, Tom Jones, David Bowie, and then let's talk about some of the engineers, Glyn Jones and
Glyn Johns
and Gus Gudgeon.
Yeah, remember back in those days, you had EMI and Decca, those two businesses, basically owned most of the labels on which stuff was published. They owned the studios. It was a whole end-to-end process. Artist and repertoire in those days used to mean that they used to manage the artist and put the artist with their repertoire. Very few people sang their own songs until they arrived with the Beatles. If you think about it, even the Rolling Stones weren't singing their own songs. They were singing the American blues musicians' songs to begin with before they started writing. But so A&R meant a different thing, but they were end to end. So most of the studios, there weren't many independent studios back in those days. So again, it was a tiny world. Not least in the staff in the studios,
Yeah, and for me, Bob, the one album that really got me into guitar playing was obviously Eric Clapton and the Blues Breakers, which is for me, I think this is like the mecca for guitar play, especially electric guitar
Recorded
players.
in here.
And it was, so Eric Clapton was carrying his Marshall 2x12 and his Leicester up these very stairs,
and
into that.
And he was a young man then, but I bet if he was here, he'd attest the fact that it was bloody heavy even then. Have you picked up one of those Blues Breakers?
No, but we're gonna do a video on one of those.
It's like a Fender Twin.
So that was
once again, you need your extensive retinue of stuff if you use equipment like that.
And this is such a legendary place, Bob, that not only did Eric Clapton, who is probably the most famous electric guitar player walking the planet, but Django Reinhardt recorded here as well.
Did he?
Yes.
Oh.
So he actually came here. I think it was even pre-war. I'm not sure if it was just after the war, before. I think maybe just before the war. And he actually came here to record. He actually recorded.
So, Darren, I'm going to tread on some slightly thin ice here, but bear with me. I wonder how many fingers he had on his left hand at that time.
Oh, no, he would have had two. He had two, and then the two kind of paralysed. But, this is the interesting thing, guys. This is the spooky thing, is that Django Reinhardt and Eric Clapton recorded in the same room, same studio.
Not at the same time.
Yeah, Studio 1 or something. I think. Can't remember the
Studio 2, I think it was.
Studio 2, yeah.
I think it was. So Studio 3 here is the massive one. Studio 3 can take a whole orchestra.
Yeah.
It's a big room.
I mean, this is we'll do a little walk around, but this is a really big.
It's a big complex.
It's a big building.
Yeah. It's now occupied by the English National Opera, but they've actually sold it, and I think it's going to be redeveloped. So the likelihood is property, around this part of London, they're not going to leave this period stuff, like this. They're probably going to knock it all down and turn it into more posh flats.
And it's a shame because, as it is now, it's actually the same layout that it was when it was a studio.
Yeah.
But if they sell it, it's going to change very quickly.
I'd love to see that Zeppelin in that room. Just literally 20 metres. Just up from my actually, there isn't too much to film inside because it is a rehearsal studio.
Yeah, not much to see.
It's.
And apparently, when they did sell this building to these new guys, they had a skip where they just threw everything away, like from the studio. So imagine the treasures that they threw away.
Oh, there would certainly have been, many lost master tapes. Multi-tracks,
maybe the reverb, the reverb,
and stuff. And bits of gear, the reverb tank,
plates,
reverb plates, whatever, the stuff. The
reverb. I think the reverb plates were actually in the basement. I kept them in the basement, and I had a few of them here.
Okay, they need somewhere stable. So anyway, what we're going to do now is we're going to go for a quick walk around, a little bit of a back view of the whole place. Hi there. So we're round the back of the Decca studios now, up the chuff, as they say. And this entrance was made famous one day because Bing Crosby had been recording in here. And he came out the back, his limo was waiting more or less exactly where I'm standing. Sir Michael Lewis, who owned Decca by then, was clearly on parade that day with a major artist from America in tow and officiating. We'll see if we can find a photograph of that, I think, because it's quite a good sesh. And you can, if you pan off to the right, you can see how big this place is. So this is basically the back of Studio 3, which is the orchestral room. And then you're going into this is now the wig department for the English National Opera here. And this would have been either the engineering department or possibly even Studio 2. Because Studio 2 was definitely on the lower floor. Okay, complete with the extras. Here we go. We're now walking around the back of West Hampstead Mews into a little mews called Exeter Mews. And Exeter Mews is the side.
Okay, so basically you can just see how big, how long the stretch is. I mean, it's a huge building. And here we have as well, this is the interesting part here, is if we look up here, this is where the Klooks Kleek would have actually been. Now, Bob and I are debating, was it there? And I think it was. I think these lights you can see here through the window, I think that was the actual Klooks Kleek.
That's now a solicitor's office, isn't it?
It's a solicitor's office. It used to be owned by the pub, but they've sold it off. And that's actually a solicitor's office, so it no longer exists as a function room, so you can't perform in there. unless you want to go and get divorced or something.
But given that so Decca is to the right of the screen at the moment with the blue windows,
So what
and they used to run cables across, didn't they?
they actually went across the roof. So this is why I think that this would have been Klooks Kleek, not below it, because they actually ran cables across the roofs, from the roof of Decca to Klooks Kleek, and that's how they made those live albums. For example, I think 10 years after, made a live album in that place there. So
They did.
yeah, and that was actually recorded.
I think it's the second album. I think it might be called Undead.
That's right, and I think also there were some live albums. I think there was a producer. I can't remember the engineer or producer. I think it may be Gus Gudgeon, who actually recorded jazz artists, and that's how the whole. Sorry, can I just cut that? So Bob, I think that's actually how the Klooks Kleek started, along with as a jazz club, and they'd actually record those jazz artists for Decca. So I think that's exactly how. That's one of the reasons they started to record live albums, and of course that obviously went on. And John Mayall's Blues Breakers actually did an album like that, a live album which was never used, but they actually, I think it's come out now. I think if I'm right in saying, but John Mayall recorded a whole album here.
And that was in the days, of course. I mean, you think about, these days there'd be more cable than a Christmas tree, but back in those days, you're talking about 4-track.
Yes, so it'd just be a snake, probably 1 or 2 cables across. And,
very doable.
Yeah, so that's basically the place where all these legendary bands performed, and Cream performed one of their first shows there, and obviously John Mayall's Blues Breakers, Eric Clapton played with the Red Telecaster through a Vox amplifier.
Now, I know while you're here that you're on the search for the Holy Grail, because what you want to find is that kind of step or ledge that the Blues Breakers are sitting on the cover of the Beano album. And you've been all round the neighbourhood.
I have. I've searched for this,
and we can't find it. We think we've got a couple of front runner places. We think behind that red wall.
It could well be there.
Right behind there,
or it could be here where they.
This is all new. Yeah. Here, lovely, isn't it? Very stylish. We bring you to all the nicest places, and we think it may be behind here. We can't find it.
Well, no, if I was making a hip hop album, that would be a pretty cool backdrop.
It would be the business. It would be the Dogs.
Yeah. So it's probably somewhere around here, because they wouldn't have gone far. And Eric Clapton was looking pretty miserable on that album cover, for whatever reason.
God knows why. If he only knew what he knows now, he would have been well pleased with himself.
Well, yeah. But so this is it's just a really interesting place, because there's not many. London is obviously, it's very expensive to buy land here, and here you've got a massive studio that could hold a whole orchestra. If we just pan around to the length of it, see just how long this building is, and it's just one of the only few places where it was a recording studio, but it was also a place that you could fit a whole orchestra into.
A few million quid here. Yeah.
And you can see obviously why they want to sell it.
For profit. Right, we're back. Just to finish off the video, cover it off. As I say, no expense at all. One thing I did want to show you about all this is that we've even got our own specialist lighting in today. I've never seen such a pair of white shoes as are illuminating our chins.
Yeah.
Ramon has got these fantastic. Are they Nikes?
Yeah, Status Quo influence.
Status Quo influence.
I mean, you can't beat Rick Parfitt with white trainers. Blue jeans,
and especially because you have an Essex association as well, don't you?
I did. Was he from Essex?
No.
No, I'm from Essex.
But the white shoes are.
Yeah, I'm a total Essex chav.
They're geezer.
And I'm not ashamed to say it.
Geezer.
Essex is the new. It's I don't know what it is.
New Silicon Valley.
Yeah, I mean, like my friend was.
The new Kabul.
Yeah, I mean Southend-on-Sea. So it's a very exotic place, isn't it? Southend-on-Sea.
Well, they've got palm trees.
Yeah. So, there's some nice Southend-on-Sea, guys. If you ever come from American friends, if you ever come to England, forget the Algarve, forget Saint-Tropez. That's all just rubbish.
You want to get down to the Welk Hut at Leigh-on-Sea.
Yeah, Leigh-on-Sea. Southend-on-Sea is
they're an English delicacy. They're just like chewing rubber bands that have been soaked in vinegar.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if that doesn't put you off, nothing will. I think that's enough from us for tonight, don't you?
I think that's enough. I think we've bored everyone to tears.
Oh, well, here you go. Anyway, this is good night from
me, and it's good night from him.
And good night from me, on location this time.
On location, Decca Studios, man. Check it out. It's amazing.
See you next time. Bye.
Take care. Best.